There are stories that history tried to bury, ones whispered behind closed doors, where bloodlines were forged in cruelty, and love was used as a weapon. Deep in the cotton fields of 1830s Louisiana, there lived a man whose wealth could buy anything but mercy. What he desired most wasn't gold or power. It was to rewrite his own legacy, no matter the cost. Hello, everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Because tonight, we're unearthing a story that should have died with its author. A story about control, obsession, and a child who should never have been born. They called him Silas Wren, the richest planter in St. Augustine Parish. His land stretched so far that a man could walk for a day and still be on Wren soil. But what no one could measure was the sickness festering inside his heart. Silas had everything that mattered in the South. A grand estate, a young wife from a good family, and more enslaved workers than he could count. But to him, ownership was never enough. He wanted to command nature itself. His wife, Margaret, was barely 20 when she married him. In portraits, she looked delicate, a thin, pale woman with eyes that never quite met the painter's gaze. In life, she was quieter still. People said the plantation seemed to grow colder after the wedding, as if the earth itself recoiled from what took place inside that house. There were rumors that Margaret could not conceive. Whispers traveled through the servants' quarters. The master's bloodline would end with him. For Silas, that was humiliation beyond measure. To be a man of means without an heir was to be a ghost before death. And so he devised a plan, one that would stain his family name forever. Late one summer night, he summoned a man from the slave quarters, a strong, dark-skinned field hand named Isaac. He told Margaret she would do her duty. What happened next was something no one dared to speak of in daylight. Weeks turned into months, and the house grew silent. Margaret stopped attending church. Her letters went unanswered. The only sounds were the moans of the wind and the slow, rhythmic creaking of the rocking chair in the nursery that held no child. But when the baby finally came, Silas stared for a long time. Because in the child's face, beneath the color of its skin, he saw something he could not explain. A familiar tilt of the mouth, a trace of his own eyes staring back. And that's when the real horror began. In the days that followed the birth, something changed inside that house. The servants said that Silas Wren stopped eating at the same table as his wife. Others swore they heard him pacing through the halls at night, muttering to himself, as though arguing with someone who wasn't there. Margaret barely left her bed. Her body had healed, but her eyes looked like they belonged to another world. When the baby cried, she would stare, motionless, as if the sound was coming from a dream she didn't recognize. The townspeople began to whisper. At church, pews emptied when the Wrens entered. Some said the child wasn't right, that its face seemed to shift depending on the light, as though two bloodlines fought beneath the skin. Others swore they saw Silas carrying the child to the fields at dusk, standing over the slave quarters in silence before turning back toward the mansion, his expression unreadable. No one dared to ask him why. Late one evening, Isaac, the man Silas had chosen, was found gone. His cabin was empty, his tools abandoned mid-task. The overseer claimed he'd run off, but others whispered that Silas himself had taken care of it. There was no proof, only the quiet understanding that the plantation soil could bury more than just roots. Margaret began to write letters again, frantic, rambling ones that never reached their destination. In one, later found in the bottom of a drawer, she wrote, "He says the child is his now, that I was only a vessel. But whose eyes are these? I see him watching from both sides." That line, watching from both sides, would haunt the family for generations, because whatever Silas saw in that baby's face, whether it was guilt, punishment, or a reflection of his own darkness, he couldn't destroy it. Instead, he began to raise it in his own image, reshaping the story, rewriting the truth. The child would grow up believing he was chosen, but no one told him what he was chosen for. The child grew fast, too fast, some said. By the age of 4, he could mimic Silas's voice almost perfectly. The servants whispered that the master would spend hours teaching him to speak, to walk, even to scowl the way he did. Margaret watched from a distance, her body present, but her spirit long gone. The boy's name was Thomas, though Silas never called him that. To him, the child was an experiment, proof that the power of will could shape blood itself. The story of Isaac, the enslaved man, was erased completely. His cabin was torn down, his name removed from the ledgers. When visitors came to the estate, Silas would say that Thomas was born of good stock, a miracle, he'd call him. But those who worked the land knew better. They'd seen the child stare across the fields, his gaze drawn toward the far edge of the property, where Isaac's cabin once stood. Sometimes at night, they swore they heard the sound of a lullaby carried on the wind, one that no one dared to claim. As the years passed, Thomas began to resemble Silas more and more, not in skin, but in manner, in the quiet cruelty behind the eyes, in the way he'd watch people rather than speak. Even Silas's old friends began to avoid the house. There was something unnatural about how the boy moved, how he smiled without warmth. Margaret's health declined rapidly. She stopped speaking altogether, her last words to the housemaid, a trembling whisper. "He has his father's eyes. But which father?" One morning, Silas ordered a new portrait to be painted, himself and the boy side by side. The painter, a man named Caraway, later described the session in his journal. "The child stared at me as if he knew what I was thinking. I could not finish the eyes. Every time I tried, they changed." The finished painting hung in the main hall for years, even after the house fell silent. Visitors said the eyes seemed to follow them down the corridor, no matter where they stood. By then, no one spoke Isaac's name again. He had vanished from the earth, but his shadow remained. By the spring of 1843, the house had grown quieter than a tomb. Margaret Wren no longer appeared at meals or on the veranda. Servants said she spent her days staring at the portrait of her husband and son, whispering to it as though someone inside could hear her. Then, one morning, her room was found empty. The window open, the curtains fluttering like shrouds. They searched the grounds for 3 days. On the 4th, they found her near the old well, her nightdress soaked and clinging to her frame, her skin pale as bone. Some said she had walked into the water willingly. Others believed she'd been drawn there by the same curse that lived in that house. Silas buried her without ceremony behind the family chapel, the grave marked only with her initials. After that, he changed. He dismissed half the staff. The music, the laughter, even the daily prayers. All of it ceased. Only the boy remained, growing more like him by the day. They could be seen walking the fields together at dawn, both silent, both expressionless. It was as if the father was training the son to forget what blood ran through him. Yet the portrait in the hall told another story. Its colors had faded to near sepia, but the eyes still gleamed unnaturally bright. Visitors who stayed overnight claimed to hear scratching sounds from behind the canvas, like someone trapped inside. One maid swore she saw moisture, tears perhaps, glistening on the boy's painted face. Years later, when the house fell into ruin, the painting was still there. Locals avoided it. Children dared each other to peer through the cracked windows at night, saying they'd see the boy grown tall, standing beside a ghostly woman who looked just like his mother. Her dress dripping with well water, her eyes blank but watchful. No one ever bought the Wren estate. It still stands today, hidden by moss and oak, its halls echoing with footsteps that don't belong to the living. Time is cruel to the guilty, but to the Wren family, it was something far worse, a mirror that never stopped reflecting. By the time Thomas reached manhood, the plantation was half abandoned. The cotton fields had withered, the workers gone or dead, and Silas Wren had grown paranoid. He refused to leave the estate, claiming people were watching from the trees at night. Some said it was guilt that haunted him. Others believed it was Isaac's ghost, still searching for what was stolen from him. Thomas inherited everything: the land, the name, and the portrait. But what he truly carried was a sickness of the soul. Those who met him described a coldness beyond comprehension. He spoke softly, yet his words cut deep. He treated others as his father had, not out of hatred, but habit. It was as if cruelty itself had been passed down like blood. On the night of Silas Wren's death, thunder rolled across the bayou. Thomas claimed his father died peacefully in his sleep, but the undertaker said the body was twisted, as though frozen mid-struggle. Silas's eyes were wide open, his mouth locked in a silent scream. After the burial, Thomas sealed the main hall and covered the portrait with a sheet. He said the past should stay buried, yet he never left the house. Servants heard him talking to someone when no one else was there. They said his voice would change, deep one moment, trembling the next, as if he were arguing with himself. Years later, when a distant relative visited, the house was nearly empty. Thomas was nowhere to be found. The only clue left behind was the old portrait. Uncovered again, the faces changed. The father's features had blurred almost to nothing, and the boy now looked older, sharper, watching. People who study old Southern records still debate the Wren case. Some say madness ran in the bloodline. Others insist it was something older, a curse born. The night a man tried to rewrite nature and found himself staring into his own reflection. And if you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Decades passed. The Wren estate became a ghost of its former glory, shrouded by moss and twisted oaks. Locals avoided it entirely. Children dared each other to peek through broken windows, claiming they could see figures moving inside, though no one lived there. The portrait of Silas and Thomas remained, now dust-covered and cracked, hanging in the main hall, as if it had absorbed the house's silence. Travelers who dared enter spoke of a chill that settled in their bones, a whisper of movement behind the canvas. Some claimed that when they looked closely, the boy's face seemed to shift. Older, younger, sometimes with the same hollow eyes that Margaret had once described. Curious historians attempted to remove the painting for preservation. Each reported strange occurrences, unexplained shadows, sudden drops in temperature, or the sensation of being watched. One account told of a young archivist who fainted while attempting to lift the frame. When he came to, the canvas had shifted slightly. Thomas's gaze now fixed directly on him, accusing and alive. Some locals say the Wren curse never left. Families living nearby report odd noises at night, faint lullabies, whispers in the dark, the echo of footsteps in abandoned hallways. The estate is no longer just a house. It is a warning. A reminder that bloodlines cannot always be contained, that some legacies are too dark to ever fade. Even today, the portrait hangs in silence, waiting for the next observer to notice its subtle change. The father and son stare out, as if guarding their secret, reminding us that some stories buried in history are never meant to be forgotten. The story of the Wren family is one that lingers in whispers, in shadowed corners of history that textbooks never dare to touch. It is a tale of obsession, cruelty, and the consequences of attempting to bend life itself to one's will. Today, the estate still stands, though nature has begun reclaiming it. The trees twist over the crumbling roof, and the air smells of decay and damp wood. Few dare to enter, and those who do speak of an oppressive presence, a feeling that the house itself remembers every sin committed within its walls. The portrait of Silas and Thomas remains the focal point. Its eyes are said to follow anyone who lingers too long, and the faces shift subtly when unobserved. Some claim that on certain nights, the boy's figure appears in the hallway, staring silently toward the door, waiting. Scholars debate the origins of this story, but the locals, those with memory and inheritance tied to the land, insist it is no mere legend. It is a reminder that the past never truly leaves us. Bloodlines carry more than genetics. They carry memory, trauma, and sometimes a darkness that refuses to fade. For the Wren family, that darkness began with one man's obsession and spread like a shadow through generations, leaving behind a legacy that chills even the most skeptical historian. Perhaps the house will fall eventually, and the portrait will crumble to dust. Perhaps not. Some stories are too potent to vanish, too haunting to be buried. The Wren family is gone, yet their secret endures, waiting for the next curious soul who dares to uncover the forbidden truths of America's past. History is full of ghosts. Some are only remembered when someone looks closely enough, listens carefully, and notices what everyone else has chosen to ignore. The Wren estate is one such ghost, and its story is far from over.